Alright, I thought I'd make another video, but I have no idea what I want to say. I guess first off, I cut my beard off a little bit. I'll probably end up cutting the rest of my hair later. I noticed since the last time I was showing my face about 7 years ago on a different YouTube channel, I've grown a little bit of cheek fat or something like that. So I'm a little pudgier. But the how do I put this? I'm not going to get into details this video. I might do it later. But there's a video I made early on this channel's history called Battle Scars Fighting Sin. And basically, long story short, if you watch that video ever and you're like, oh my god, how could anyone do that to themselves? Right? Like, if I ever make the video I'm thinking of, and you watch that video and then you watch my future possible video, you'll be like, oh, he deserved it. But I want you to know that I voluntarily went through with that process of bleeding, torturing myself nearly to death multiple times, poisoning myself, trying to kill myself, and so on. Voluntarily, to pay in blood for everything I tried to do, or did actually, before. So, to summarize it in a couple words really quickly, I have participated in nearly Weimar levels of degeneracy. Sort of. Nearly that level. And treating myself like Rorschach does others for their wrongdoings was my redemption. It's the mark, sign, and seal of someone who's turning away from that sort of thing from now on. At no matter the pain, no matter the risk of death, and so on. But for now, Battle Scars Fighting Sin is the video that you can see if you want to go to the beginning of my video channel. It's like the 4th earliest video or something. And I show my scars. Like, I'm a little tubby, but I show all my scars as best as I can, except for the one on the neck right about here-ish, from about 7 knife wounds. But the reason why I'm mentioning this in this video is basically to say, look, I know what it's like to be on the wrong side of morality, and I know what it's like, with a code of honor at least, even if I failed in that, to hate the abuse of children and also the tyranny of weak men and so on. Like weak, like personal character weakness and so on. And I have a fundamental understanding of, like, just how bad it is and why it gets so bad and so on. 46 suicide attempts was what I felt was necessary, at least, to atone for my own wrongdoing. And it was less than Epstein's Island. It was less than Weimar Germany. It was less than what the socialists are doing to people. It's less than what the Muslims are doing to people, and so on. And yet, knowing what it's like on the inside of evil and rising above it, I can say that the socialists, Muslims, third worlders, globalists deserve something akin to tortured to death without reservation. And the moral of the story, by the way, the full moral of my story isn't just, oh, you just happen to feel a little bad about, or really bad about things that weren't too bad and so on. It's not quite that. It's more like I know just how bad it is to do things like those in a lesser manner in the same direction as those groups. And knowing from the inside, I also rose above because I've got dual nature, because God came into my life. And I had an inkling that it was wrong, and I tried to atone in a sort of dedicated way, but not quite as hardcore as I did after God basically guided me to do so. And now that I know God exists, and the levels of scourging that need to be done to cleanse one of having done things like that to a lesser degree than those 4 groups I mentioned, or 5 groups I mentioned, it's pretty bad. One of the things that I've always struggled against is basically I was physically and emotionally abused as a child very heavily, to the point like Child Protective Services came by like 10 to 15 times over 8 or 9 years. I think it was more like 10 times, roughly. So like, it's like, okay, but that wasn't the only part of it. It was that my abuser weaponized the psychiatric system against me to gaslight me into not hating being abused in those ways. And the corruption that does to a child is the gift that keeps on giving. Child abuse is the gift that keeps on giving, basically. It's horrendous. And then some people grow up and they abuse adults as adults. And that's where those 5 come into play. If not even children are safe, then the adults are not safe either, in politics and society and so on, from manipulators and narcissists, pedophiles, psychopaths, and sociopaths. If they're willing to do or allow things to be done to children, the adults are only as safe as their danger, if threatened, allows them to be. It's not a matter of someone's goodwill towards you. It's a matter of their fear of retribution. Pure and simple. That's all that's keeping them from doing worse. And you'll notice that they're very sneaky. They slow boil. They raise the temperature up slightly and slightly and slightly over time, gradually, into worse and worse situations for the majority of the population. These people want you dead. They want to steal from you and loot. They want you dead and to loot your corpse so they can be king of the ashes. They don't like serving others. They don't like service to others. They don't like helping people out except themselves. They like to parasitize people, and the worst thing in the world for them is, with their god complexes and so on, is to be insulted or mocked. in terms of what is most people are willing to do in regards to that. Exposing them is important, but we need to press on with solutions. Raising awareness is not good enough if no one does anything. There are multiple venues for that kind of thing. Restore Britain in the UK with Rupert Lowe is a solutions, activism, and possible lawfare and so on kind of game. Reform Party is containment against the right wing, but it's at least seeding that the right wing has some degree of influence. And it currently mistakenly represents the right wing vote at the moment, because Reform initially promised to deport the migrants and so on, I believe, until Nigel Farage or Nigel Farage got into power, and then he started sabotaging the direction it was going in, into one of the other parties' platforms, basically, the Uniparty, basically. My guess is that Keir Starmer is a pedophile. He's got that sort of face and attitude, and there's that bit about those three Ukrainian teenage strippers or prostitutes that were angry at him for undisclosed reasons. And it was so contentious that they basically didn't report on them firebombing his house at all. Mark Carney is photographed and known to have met with Ghislaine Maxwell multiple times. Ghislaine Maxwell was the recruiter and manager of Epstein's child molestation enterprise, with all the shadowy elites and various mucky mucks and upper echelons of society clients. I personally don't think Trump would be cowed into not releasing the Epstein files by Israel alone. I am willing to bet the rot goes so much more widespread and so much deeper throughout at least the Western world, to the point Trump is like, oh, I can't do this. They'll kill my entire family. No, I don't think it's just Israel. I think it goes so much deeper in that. The truth of the matter is that 3 to 5% on the upper levels, upper estimates of the society are pedophiles. Now, granted, attraction doesn't necessarily mean action. You know, there's maybe they're counting someone who gets a peripheral vision side glance, a momentary glance of like someone, and they look vaguely attractive. So it's like, oh, she's hot, you know, and then they actually look at the person for real, and then they're like, wait a minute, she's too young. You know what I mean? Because attractiveness can be hard to guess just at this corner of your eye, basically. You know, I'm willing to accept that maybe some people like that got caught in it and so on. And it's like, okay, you know, I mean, I known a lot of men who have basically done that, so it's like, okay, you know. But still, 3 to 5% is a lot. And then there's also 5% of the population is sociopaths, and then 1 to 2% of the population is psychopaths. And then you get narcissists and so on. So a good 10 to 20% of the population are biologically and neurologically built to predate on the rest of humanity. And this is throughout the world. So approximately 1.8 billion people in the world are wired to prey on the rest of humanity. That's a lot of people out of 8 billion. That's a lot of people. That's 20% of the population, 1 out of 5 people. Civil society and the civic body and civilization itself basically exists to protect the 80% from the 20%. That's literally everything it's about. Like, you might argue a certain nation state or one country or something, a single country is like, it's like, oh, the military exists to protect us from outside forces and so on. It's like, okay, yeah. But everything internal exists to protect from the 20%. And the migrants thing is like, we're getting the 20% of the predators on the rest of humanity, from the rest of the world throughout into the West. And like, they literally advertise, the human traffickers advertise, come to the West, you can rape their women and children. You can conquer them. And that's directly playing into the most predatory aspects of humanity throughout the world. And, for someone who grew up, if someone grows up in a country where raping children gets you the death penalty, like Pakistan, you go to the UK, Britain, and you might get 2 months in prison for raping and murdering a 10-year-old because you're a migrant. 2 months is nothing. That's like wow, you get to fulfill your most sick fantasies and desires at minimal cost. So it attracts those people. And there's a Richard Dawkins concept called cheats, suckers, grudgers. Now, a cheat is basically a parasite. They gain things from others and don't give back much in return. And they can do it consistently. Like, it's like an obsession, an addiction for them, basically, to parasitize. A sucker is someone that just gives and gives no matter how much they've been burned by the other person. And a grudger is someone that, if you play fair with them, they'll play fair with you. If you parasitize on them, they'll cut you off. Now, the exact amount is like maybe like 5 times of trying, and then they'll cut you off, or something like that. But basically, there's 2 explanations for why Western leaders are allowing this stuff to happen, or enabling it to happen. The most benevolent interpretation is that they're suckers, and they expect the rest of society to act like suckers, not grudgers. And, oh shucks, we can't do anything about the parasites because that's not in my nature to fight back against them or cut them off. The predators on the rest of humanity. At this point, though, it's happened so much that, and there's so much vitriol against grudgers, when the grudgers are merely calling out the parasites and the cheats and the predators on the rest of humanity, that I'm absolutely dead certain that the cheats are the ones in charge. And they're the ones that flocked towards positions of influence over society and authority over society and so on. Because if you have power, you cannot be held accountable. You can rig the game in your favor and so on. Kind of like how Epstein got convicted around 2006 maybe, or 2016. And I think it was 2006 or 7 or something. And he admitted to raping girls and stuff like that, and he got the lightest sentence ever. So it's not that power is corrupting necessarily, it's that power attracts the easily corruptible, or the already corrupt. And the thing about it is, we just haven't seen their corruption yet, if they're not seemingly corrupt already. And when you get to that point of understanding, you realize it's an absolute nightmare scenario. It's really a wake up and smell the ashes kind of call at this point. You stick your head in the sand, and all you're doing is presenting your rear end, your ass, to be fucked by these monsters. You're not protecting yourself. The only thing we can do left is fight. There is nowhere to run. They're everywhere. They have to be destroyed. There's no point in surrendering unless you want to end yourself. And of course, they particularly hate the grudgers, because the grudgers will cut them off from being able to prey on the rest of humanity. That's why the right wing is so vilified, because the right wing is the only real resistance against the monsters that prey on the rest of humanity. It's not perfect. There are monsters in the right wing as well, don't get me wrong. They'll game the system any which way they possibly can. And it's a game of statistics. It's a game of statistics, basically. But the statistics favor right-wing virtue and left-wing evil, and so on, and third worldist evil, and globalist evil, and socialist evil. It's not enough to have a theoretical best organized system ever in some sort of unstudied, generalized, bloodless theory. We actually do need to return to tradition and reinstitute heavy penalties, like life in prison with no parole and no pardon allowed, to the death penalty, to vigilantism against monsters that prey on humanity, and so on. And lawfare. Now, the exact mechanism needs to be based on a few things, such as, was justice done at all? How serious was the malevolent behavior? And how many people were affected? How morally reprehensible was justice served? and so on. Without the imposition of and proper enforcement, which means truly actually enforcing common human decency laws on malevolent monsters preying on the rest of humanity, then we will continue to collapse into barbarism where no one is safe. Like I said, civilization itself exists to protect us from the monsters, the inhuman skin. Basically. When tyranny becomes law, revolution becomes duty. Or rebellion becomes duty. But the goal is not to just seize power oneself personally. It's to find the most fitting leader possible who will enforce just laws. Enforce, right? Force laws that are just and common sense and so on. On to the freaks and the monsters and undermine and destroy and scare off the monsters in positions of authority and influence until you've driven them into a corner. And you can kill a lot of people and still not actually get the genetics down of those monsters. But you can kill the individual monsters. You can drive those types into a corner and remember the lessons of their burning down civilization. And keep civilization safe, which exists specifically to protect against monsters in human skin, for the 80% against the 20%. And you will find that the total state, the totalitarian state, and so on, is no longer a threat. Liberty and justice coexist. They're not diametrically opposed. Order, liberty, justice is life when you combine them. Protection, freedom, virtue, which is a vital part of it, absolutely necessary, virtue. Protection, freedom, virtue. Then you get plenty or prosperity or wealthy. And it's a father's job to do it for his family, and it's a citizen's job to ensure it for his neighborhood, and it's the leader's job to do it for his nation. And one thing we have to do is learn to take, in a Promethean sense, the fire of the gods, which we've relegated to the elites, and learn how to wield the flames in the most consuming way possible, imaginable. Even in a consuming way possible, if necessary, to burn away the evil ones. It's not like, oh, I'm going to be a pacifist monk and pray and that's going to solve it all. You need fighters. You need knights of God. People dedicated on some level to the common cause of protection, freedom, virtue, plenty, who are willing to sacrifice their own lives and the lives of the guilty for justice' sake. There's no cleaning this up without fighting. Now, whether that takes on a direct action approach a la Antifa, except right wing, and therefore probably a little less insane, or it takes political, social organization, and courage and surety in calling for the death penalty for these monsters, I don't know. But one thing is certain, God says do not murder, but he will give plenty of reasons to kill a motherfucker. So yeah, that's just where I stand on it. And the sooner we all get there, then the faster we can clean this up. Because one thing we're learning really quickly is that mercy to the guilty is cruelty to the innocent. Now, there is a time and place for mercy as well. Don't get me wrong. There are times for that as well. And mercy means undeserved forgiveness, basically. And like, I'm not going to punish you as hard as I could, or I'm not going to punish you at all, and so on. There's times and places for that. But this child rape, child murder, murder and rape of women, murder and rape of men and boys, this constant theft against the taxpayer at like half their money, so that half their lives is dedicated to slaving for the state, is like, it's too much. That's totally inappropriate. You know, that's like rise up and flame the fans of war kind of levels of predation. And everything that they say to justify themselves is just a cover for parasitism, basically. Or cover for predating on the rest of humanity. That's all it is.